The cutting June wind blew through the city's central square, carrying dry leaves that swirled among the hurried passers-by. Emily remained motionless like a small statue in the center of the ancient stone pavement, her dark brown hair fluttering in the wind, while her voice, clear as crystal, rose above the murmur of the crowd. At 12 years old, her frail, pale body contrasted with the power of her singing, which seemed to come from a place far beyond that fragile shell. She closed her eyes, letting the music transport her away from the cold, hunger, and fear that were her constant companions. "Each note I sing is for you, Mum. Each coin is a chance to see you smiling again," Emily thought as her voice gained strength, as if through it she could send some warmth to the small room where her mother rested, consumed by illness. A grey-haired gentleman in a worn suit slowed his pace, stopping for a moment to listen to her. His tired eyes sparkled with a flicker of emotion as he deposited some coins in the small, faded wool hat that Emily had placed in front of her. The girl opened her eyes and smiled in gratitude, without interrupting the song she had learned from her mother years ago. The man nodded slightly and went on his way, swallowed by the mass of indifferent people, absorbed in their own concerns. Emily watched him leave, admiring how that brief moment of human connection warmed her heart, more than any coat could warm her body, trembling from the cold. "People have music inside them, but they forget to listen to it," her mother used to say on the nights they sang together before illness stole her strength. "Our task is to remind them, even if just for a moment, that there is beauty in the world." The hours dragged slowly as the sky, previously a pale winter blue, began to darken, tinting with orange and violet hues. Emily felt her throat scratch, dried out from the continuous effort of singing outdoors for so many hours. Her stomach emitted painful growls that she tried to ignore, focusing only on the melody and the constant rhythm of her breathing. It had been 2 days since she had eaten anything, besides a piece of hard bread that a kind baker had given her as yesterday's leftover. Hunger had become a constant companion, a ravenous animal gnawing at her stomach from within, but one that Emily had learned to tame with the strength of her determination. Each note emitted was a small victory against a body that begged for rest and nourishment. "I can endure a bit longer. Just one more song," she murmured to herself, swallowing hard to relieve her dry throat. "Mum has no one else to turn to. Only me." As the square began to empty with the approach of night, Emily finished her last song, a sad melody about farewells and reunions that always drew tears from the few who really stopped to listen. With fingers stiffened by the cold, she gathered the coins scattered in the hat, sitting on a stone bench to count them meticulously. Each cent represented a small hope, a fraction of the price of the medicine that could ease her mother's pain. With a heavy heart, Emily realized that the total was still far from what was needed, despite having sung since dawn. A sigh escaped her chapped lips as she carefully stored the coins in a small cloth bag sewn into the lining of her worn coat. "Why don't people stop to listen?" she asked the nearly empty square, her voice now hoarse with fatigue. "Don't they realize that each coin could mean one more day of life for someone?" The aroma of freshly baked bread invaded her nostrils when Emily passed by the corner bakery, making her stomach contract in agony. Through the illuminated window, she could see shelves full of golden loaves and cakes that seemed to send an irresistible invitation. For a moment, Emily stopped, hypnotized by the sight of food, feeling saliva accumulate in her mouth. With the money she had gathered, she could buy a whole loaf and perhaps even a small cinnamon cake, her mother's favorite. The idea of returning home with something for both of them to eat made her heart momentarily race, until the cruel reality weighed again on her shoulders like a lead cloak. "First the medicine, then we think about food," she said to herself, repeating the words her mother always used when they had to choose between basic necessities. The body can endure hunger longer than it can endure pain. The pharmacy was 2 blocks away, a small establishment with a green luminous cross that blinked intermittently on the worn facade. Emily pushed the heavy door, being greeted by the characteristic aroma of medications and cleaning products. The pharmacist, a middle-aged man with thin-framed glasses and an impeccable white coat, looked up from the papers he was examining when he heard the bell at the door tinkle. His gaze softened as he recognized the girl, a regular customer in recent months. Emily approached the counter, walking with steps that tried to demonstrate a firmness she was far from feeling. while the dizziness from hunger made the floor seem unstable beneath her feet. "I'm back to get my mother's medicine, sir," said Emily, carefully placing the coins on the polished wooden counter. "I managed to gather almost the full amount today, just a little short." The pharmacist counted the coins with nimble fingers, a crease of concern forming between his graying eyebrows. His eyes met Emily's, who stared at him with barely contained hope. For a moment, it seemed he would say something, perhaps about the insufficient amount, but then he sighed deeply, as if fighting an internal battle. With a decisive movement, he turned to the shelves behind the counter, searching among the various bottles until he found the necessary medicine. Emily observed every movement, her heart racing with anxiety, her small hands gripping the edge of the counter so tightly that her knuckles whitened. "Take this bottle," he finally said, gently pushing the medication toward the girl. "Next time, try to bring the full amount. I cannot make exceptions every time." With the precious bottle secure against her chest, Emily left the pharmacy, feeling simultaneously victorious and exhausted. The way back home seemed longer than ever, each step requiring superhuman effort from her legs, trembling from hunger and fatigue. The streets, now practically deserted due to the hour and the intense cold, seemed more threatening, full of shadows that danced on the walls of old buildings. Emily quickened her pace, imagining the relief she would see on her mother's face when she arrived with the medicine. Perhaps she could prepare her a tea with what remained of the herbs the neighbor had donated the previous week. The thought gave her strength to continue moving forward, one foot in front of the other, toward the modest exposed brick building where they rented a small room on the 3rd floor. "I'll take care of you, Mum," she promised in a low voice. Like a mantra she repeated to keep hope alive. "I won't let anything bad happen as long as I can sing." Upon turning the corner of her street, Emily immediately noticed something was wrong. A small group of people had gathered at the entrance of the building where she lived, talking in tense and worried voices. Her heart painfully accelerated when she recognized some neighbors, including Mrs. Agnes from the 1st floor, who always offered a kind smile and occasionally some food leftovers. The elderly woman had her hands twisted in her apron, a gesture that Emily knew to be a sign of nervousness. With a terrible presentiment forming in her chest, Emily ran the last meters, her legs finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "What happened? Is it my mother?" she asked aloud, causing the neighbors to turn in her direction, with expressions that confirmed her fears before anyone answered. The momentary silence that followed her question was more terrifying than any response could be. "Mrs." Agnes stepped forward, separating from the group to approach Emily with open arms. Her teary eyes reflected the yellowish light from the street lamp, creating a golden glow that contrasted with the evident sadness on her wrinkled face. Emily stood still, the medicine bottle clutched between her fingers so tightly that she feared breaking it, while waiting for the words she knew would come, and that would change everything. The neighbor finally reached her, wrapping her in a tight embrace that smelled of lavender and bread dough, an embrace that tried to protect her from a truth that could no longer be avoided. "Your mother had a severe crisis, dear," said Mrs. Agnes, her voice trembling with contained emotion. The neighbor from the apartment next door heard the moans and called for help. The ambulance took her less than 10 minutes ago. The world seemed to spin around Emily, Mrs. Agnes's words echoing in her mind as she tried to process what had happened. Her mother, alone and suffering while she was at the square. Her mother, being taken by strangers to an unknown place. The bottle of medicine in her hands had suddenly become useless. The revelation brought a wave of vertigo so intense that Emily had to lean against the rough wall of the building to avoid falling. Her body, already weakened by hunger and fatigue, now seemed about to give up completely under the weight of concern. Where did they take her? "I need to go to her now," she managed to say between broken breaths, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. "She needs this medicine. She needs me." Mrs. Agnes held Emily's shoulders firmly, forcing her to look into her eyes. There was a determination there that contrasted with the elderly woman's fragile appearance, as if at that moment she was gathering strength to pass on to the girl. Emily felt a wave of gratitude amid the desperation, silently thanking that she wasn't completely alone in this terrible moment. The other neighbors approached slowly, forming a protective circle around the two. "I'll call a taxi for you, little one," declared Mrs. Agnes, decisively adjusting the shawl on her shoulders. The worn yellow taxi moved through the city streets, now almost empty due to the hour. Emily kept her gaze fixed on the window, watching the streetlights pass in luminous blurs, creating golden trails that reminded her of the shooting stars her mother had shown her once. The driver, a gentleman with a greying beard who seemed to know Mrs. Agnes, drove in respectful silence, occasionally casting concerned glances through the rearview mirror. Emily felt as if she were living a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up, her mind alternating between fragile hope and absolute terror of arriving too late. "She'll be okay, won't she?" Emily asked herself. "Mum is strong. She always says we're tougher than we look." The arrival at the hospital was marked by an oppressive silence that seemed to envelop everything around. Emily jumped out of the taxi before it had completely stopped, running to the entrance with her heart pounding. The automatic doors slid open, revealing an aseptically clean environment illuminated by fluorescent lights that gave skin a ghostly tone. The characteristic smell of disinfectant and medications hit her nostrils, bringing with it the brutal reality of the situation. Her mother was there, somewhere within those walls, perhaps struggling to breathe, perhaps calling for her. The idea made Emily move determinedly to the reception desk, where a middle-aged woman with hair tied in a severe bun was typing something on the computer. "Please, I need to see my mother, Laura Harris," said Emily, rising on tiptoe to be seen over the high counter. She was brought by ambulance a short time ago. The receptionist raised her eyes from the computer, her gaze quickly assessing the disheveled girl in front of her. Emily could imagine what she saw: a dirty child with worn clothes and a desperate look, someone who clearly didn't belong in that organized and controlled environment. The woman adjusted her colorful framed glasses on her thin nose before turning her attention back to the screen, typing something with mechanical efficiency. "I'm sorry, little one, but we need documentation proving you're a relative of the patient to enter the room," declared the receptionist in a bureaucratic tone without raising her eyes from the screen. "Those are the institution's rules to ensure patients' well-being." The desperation that Emily had been containing exploded in her chest like a violent wave, sweeping away any vestige of composure. Hot tears ran down her pale cheeks as she gripped the edge of the counter with renewed force. The injustice of the situation seemed to suffocate her, being so close to her mother and yet prevented from reaching her by rules that didn't comprehend the deep bond that united them. It wasn't just her mother who was in there. It was her entire world, the only person left in her life, the reason why she sang until exhaustion every day. "She's my only family. I didn't bring the documents, but I need to see her," exclaimed Emily, her voice echoing through the silent lobby, charged with all the emotion that her small body could contain. "I have no one else in the world besides her. Please, I need to see her." The echo of her desperate voice attracted the attention of a doctor passing through the corridor adjacent to reception. The woman, middle-aged with short grey hair, wore an impeccable white coat and carried a clipboard. Something in Emily's plea made her pause and approach, observing the scene with attentive eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. There was genuine compassion in her gaze when she approached the counter, positioning herself beside Emily with a presence that conveyed serene authority. The receptionist straightened in her chair instinctively upon noticing the doctor's approach. "Let her in," said the doctor with a calm but firm voice. "The patient was calling for her. I'll take her there myself." Emily followed the doctor through the silent corridors, her hesitant steps echoing against the white ceramic floor. The smell of cleaning products and medications hung in the air, mixing with the aroma of flowers, coming from a small arrangement on the nursing station table. The pale green walls seemed to want to convey a tranquility that contrasted with the storm of emotions inside Emily. The doctor, noticing her nervousness, slowed down and offered a gentle smile that illuminated her face, tired from so many nights on duty. "Your mother is conscious, but she needs to rest," the doctor explained in a low voice, her calm tone helping to soothe Emily's racing heart. "She hasn't stopped asking about you for a moment." At the door of room 207, the doctor paused briefly and placed a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. Through the small glass panel in the door, the girl could see her mother, sitting in bed with pillows supporting her back. Although pale, Laura looked serene, her gaze directed toward the window where the last ray of sunlight painted the sky in golden hues. The sight of her, still present, still alive, made the knot tightening Emily's throat dissolve into a sigh of relief. The doctor opened the door gently, announcing her presence with a light tap on the wood. "Laura, look who's here to see you," the doctor said in a melodious voice. "I'll leave you alone for a while. If you need anything, just press that button next to the bed." Laura turned her face toward the door, and her tired eyes immediately lit up upon seeing Emily. A soft smile spread across her face, transforming her exhausted features into something radiant and familiar. She extended her hand toward her daughter, a silent invitation that Emily accepted without hesitation, rushing to the bedside. The hug they shared was gentle, Emily fearing to hurt her fragile mother, while Laura seemed to want to absorb every detail of that moment, her fingers caressing the girl's dark hair with infinite tenderness. "My little singer," Laura whispered, her voice weak but filled with love. "How I missed you today. Tell me, how was your day on the streets? How many people stopped to listen to my angel sing?" Emily carefully settled on the edge of the bed, holding her mother's hand between hers. She noticed how it was colder than normal, but didn't comment, preferring to focus on the light still present in Laura's eyes. With forced enthusiasm, she began to tell about her day, the few good moments, omitting the hunger and fatigue. She talked about an elderly gentleman who stopped to listen to her and tossed a higher-value coin in the hat, about a child who danced to the sound of her voice before being pulled away by a hurried mother. As she spoke, she took the medicine bottle from her pocket, placing it proudly on the bedside table. "I managed to collect enough for your medicine, Mom," Emily said, trying to hide the disappointment upon realizing it might be too late. "Tomorrow I'll go to that square near the theater, where more tourists pass by. I'm sure I'll get money for better treatment." Laura looked at the bottle and her eyes welled up. With visible effort, she raised her hand to touch Emily's face, a touch light as a feather that seemed to want to memorize every feature of her daughter. There was so much love in that simple gesture that Emily felt her heart tighten. It was as if her mother was trying to transmit years of affection in a single moment, trying to fill a future that both, deep down, knew they wouldn't share. "You have always been my strength. Did you know that?" asked Laura, her voice choked with emotion. "From the first moment I held you in my arms, so small and perfect, I knew you were the best gift life could give me. I don't want to leave you without you knowing how much I loved you," said the mother, in a tone of farewell that made Emily's heart tighten. A silence fell over the room. Through the window, the sky now displayed timid stars that began to appear in the darkened mantle, as if watching that moment of connection. Emily didn't want to say goodbye, but she felt in her heart that this was her last moment with her mother, despite not accepting it as truth. To chase away the dark thoughts, the girl began to hum softly the lullaby her mother always sang to her, a simple melody about birds that flew freely in the blue sky, looking for their way back home. Laura closed her eyes, a serene smile on her lips, nodding slightly to the rhythm of the music she had sung so many times. "Your voice is more beautiful every day," she observed when Emily finished the song. "You know so much about music. You always know which song to sing, which music will touch everyone's heart. You remind me so much of him, you know. The same extraordinary perception for music, the same ability to recognize talent, the same love for music. Your voice reminds me of myself, but your passion for music reminds me of him." Emily tilted her head, confused by the mention of a him who had never been part of their conversations. In all her 12 years of life, Laura rarely talked about her past, about anyone who had been part of their lives before it was just the two of them against the world. When Emily asked, Laura gently changed the subject, saying that the past was like a song that had already ended, and that they should focus on the song they were creating together. This sudden reference aroused her curiosity, but also a fear of breaking that precious moment. "Who are you talking about, Mom?" she finally asked, her voice almost a whisper. "You've never mentioned anyone I look like before." Laura opened her eyes, and Emily noticed a decision being made in that gaze. Her mother adjusted herself on the pillows, as if gathering strength, not just physical, but emotional for what she was about to say. There was a weight in that movement, the weight of secrets kept for too long, of delayed truths that now asked to be revealed. Laura squeezed Emily's hand with surprising firmness, a gesture that seemed to ask for understanding for what would come next. "Emily, my love, I need to tell you something important," Laura began, each word carefully chosen. Something I should have told you long ago, but never found the strength or the right moment. The heart monitor beside the bed kept its constant rhythm, marking the seconds that passed as Emily waited, feeling that she was on the verge of a revelation that would change everything she knew about her own story. Her heart was racing, a mixture of anxiety and fear of the unknown. Laura took a deep breath as if gathering all her courage for the words that would follow, words that carried the weight of years of silence. "You have a father, Emily," Laura finally declared, her voice gaining unexpected strength. "A father who never knew of your existence, who doesn't know he has a wonderful daughter with a gift as precious as his own." The world seemed to stop for a moment around Emily. The words echoed in her mind. A father, someone connected to her by blood beyond her mother. Someone who shared her gift for music, according to Laura. It was such a strange and at the same time fascinating idea that Emily didn't know how to react. Thousands of questions arose simultaneously, competing for which would be the first to be asked. Why had he never been mentioned before? Where was he? Why had he never looked for them? And most importantly, who was he? "Why did you never tell me about him before?" Emily finally asked, her voice trembling slightly with contained emotion. "Did he abandon us? Didn't he want to stay with us?" A shadow of sadness passed over Laura's face, but there was no bitterness in her expression, only a soft melancholy like the last notes of a song. She shook her head slightly, her fingers tracing comforting circles on Emily's palm, as she did when the girl was little and had nightmares. There was so much love in that simple gesture that Emily felt tears forming in her eyes, though she tried to contain them. "No, my love, he never abandoned us," Laura replied softly. "When I discovered I was pregnant, he had already left. Not by choice, but by necessity. He never knew he would have a daughter, that you would exist." Laura paused, her breathing becoming a little more labored. Emily immediately worried, offering water that her mother refused with a slight gesture. There was a growing urgency in her eyes, as if she knew her time was running out. Not for that conversation, but perhaps for all the others they might have in the future. Emily felt a tightness in her chest at this realization, but remained attentive, absorbing every word like a promise she should fulfill. "He had an extraordinary talent, Emily," Laura continued, a nostalgic gleam in her eyes. "The same one I see in you every time you sing." It was as if the whole world stopped to listen to him, as if the stars themselves leaned in to capture his music. Laura's words painted such a vivid picture that Emily could almost see this mysterious man, could almost hear his music. A part of her, which had always felt a little out of place in the world, as if belonging somewhere else, began to make sense. Perhaps this was the explanation for her gift, for the way music flowed through her, as if it had always been there, waiting to be released. Laura squeezed her hand harder, bringing her back to the present moment. "I want you to find him when I'm no longer here, sweetheart," Laura said, her voice now more urgent. "He deserves to know he has such a wonderful daughter, and you deserve to know that part of yourself." Emily felt panic rising in her chest at her mother's words. The idea of Laura no longer being here was unthinkable, a concept so painful that her mind refused to process it. She grabbed her mother's hand desperately, as if she could anchor her to the world by the sheer force of her desire. The tears she had tried to hold back now flowed freely down her face, falling onto their interlaced hands. "Don't talk like that, Mum," Emily begged, her voice breaking with emotion. "You'll get better, we'll find a better doctor, I'll sing more, earn more money, we'll stay together, like we've always been." Laura smiled with infinite tenderness, raising her hand to wipe the tears from Emily's face. There was so much peace in that smile, so much acceptance that contrasted with Emily's desperation. She pulled her daughter closer, embracing her with all the strength she still possessed, as if trying to protect her one last time, transmitting all her love in a single gesture. "I love you more than anything in this world, my little one," Laura whispered against Emily's hair. "You were the greatest blessing of my life, my greatest joy, my masterpiece. Never forget that," she said. The girl couldn't contain the avalanche of emotions coursing through her body at that moment. "I love you, Mom. You're everything to me," the girl replied. Still wrapped in her mother's embrace, Emily felt more than sore when Laura leaned back against the pillows, her breathing becoming slower. There was a serene expression on her face, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Her eyes, though tired, shone with a love so deep that Emily felt enveloped in it like a protective mantle. Laura tucked a strand of hair behind Emily's ear, a gesture so familiar and comforting that it made her heart ache with the possibility of not feeling it again. "Find him, my dear. He returned to the country a few months ago. I didn't have the courage to tell him everything," Laura asked, her voice now barely more than a whisper. "His name is—" A deep sigh interrupted her words, her eyes closing slowly, as if overcome by an irresistible fatigue. The heart monitor beside the bed emitted a different sound, making Emily look fearfully at the numbers and lines she didn't understand. The door opened quickly, and the doctor entered along with 2 nurses, moving with silent efficiency to the bedside. Emily was gently moved aside, one of the nurses guiding her to a nearby chair while the team worked on her mother. "She's just sleeping now," the nurse explained kindly. "The medications are very strong and she needs to rest. We can't allow her to become too agitated." Emily nodded, although part of her knew there was more happening than they were telling her. The medical team worked in silence for a few minutes, adjusting machines and administering medications. Eventually, the doctor approached Emily, her face kind, but with a sadness she couldn't completely hide. She crouched down to be at eye level with the girl, her hands holding something Emily hadn't noticed before, a small oval silver medallion. "Your mother was holding this when she arrived," the doctor explained, placing the object in Emily's palm. "She made it clear that it was for you. It seemed very important to her that you have it." The medallion was heavier than it looked, ornamented with delicate details that spoke of a time when objects were made to last generations. With trembling fingers, Emily found the small latch on the side and carefully opened it. Inside was an old photograph, slightly faded by time and constant handling. It showed her mother, much younger and with a radiant smile that Emily had rarely seen, next to a man whose face was partially visible. The photograph had been damaged in that specific corner, as if it had been folded repeatedly, making it impossible to completely see his features. Emily could only distinguish a smile and what appeared to be a musical instrument, possibly a guitar, in his hands. Turning the medallion over, she noticed an inscription engraved on the back, words worn by constant touch, "Where music united us." However, hours later the doctors gave the worst news the girl could hear, but that her heart knew was the truth. Her mother had passed away. A numbness overtook Emily. As the days without her mother passed, she fled from social workers. The small room she shared with Laura no longer belonged to her, impossible to maintain without the little Laura contributed with occasional sewing jobs. Emily now wandered the city streets, sleeping in shelters when she could get a spot, or in protected corners of squares when she had no other option. All her belongings fit in a worn backpack: 2 changes of clothes, a broken hairbrush, the empty bottle of the last medicine she had bought for her mother, and, most precious of all, the silver medallion she rarely took off her neck. In the hardest days, when hunger tightened to the point of blurring her vision, Emily held the medallion against her chest and softly sang the songs her mother had taught her, as if music could fill the void left by absence. "I'll find him, Mum," she whispered to herself every night before sleeping, like a promise and a prayer. "I'll discover who my father is, even if I have to sing on every corner of this city." The only clue she possessed was the medallion with that enigmatic inscription, "Where music united us." Emily deduced that her parents must have met somewhere related to music. After days observing the city, she gathered courage to visit the municipal theatre, the most imposing place dedicated to music she could imagine. That Tuesday morning, she positioned herself before the majestic building of classical architecture, with its imposing columns and marble staircase that seemed to lead to another world. Posters announced an orchestra concert for that night, and well-dressed people entered and exited, some carrying instruments in elegant cases. Emily felt tiny before such grandeur, her simple and worn clothes contrasting with the refined environment. Still, she took a deep breath and climbed the first steps of the staircase, determined to enter and ask if anyone knew a musician who could be her father. "Excuse me, miss, may I help you?" asked a uniformed security guard, blocking her path with a politeness that barely disguised the disdain when evaluating her appearance. "The theatre is open only for scheduled rehearsals and performances." Emily tried to explain that she only needed information, that she was looking for someone who might have worked there years ago or recently returned to the country, but her words seemed to evaporate before the man's impassive expression. Two other security guards approached, as if she represented some kind of threat to that cultural sanctuary. The first guard crossed his arms, his posture now more rigid as he pointed to a regulations poster affixed near the main door. "Entry only for spectators with tickets," he declared with definitive firmness, his voice rising enough to attract curious glances from passers-by. "If you want to attend the concert, tickets start at $1,200 at the box office to your right." An impossible amount for someone who struggled to get food each day, without a regular job, and not knowing if she would have a roof to sleep under. Emily felt tears burning her eyes, not from sadness, but from frustration and anger. She was so close to what could be a connection to her past, to the part of herself she didn't know, and once again doors were literally closing in her face. In an impulse born of desperation, Emily did the only thing she knew how to do better than anyone: sing. Right there, on the marble steps, she planted her feet firmly and let her voice rise like a bird in flight. She chose the song her mother loved most, an old aria about loss and hope that Laura said she had heard for the first time precisely in a theater like that one. The natural acoustics of the entrance amplified her voice, projecting it across the square as if she had an invisible sound system at her disposal. "Where are your wings now, my angel? Where did the music that united us fly?" sang Emily, improvising verses that seemed to come directly from her wounded heart. "I search in the notes for the path to find you, in the echo of memories that the wind did not take." The effect was immediate and surprising. Hurried passers-by slowed their pace, some stopping completely to observe the fragile-looking girl who produced that extraordinary sound. A small crowd began to form at the foot of the staircase, people attracted by the crystalline voice that seemed not to belong to this world. The security guards themselves appeared disconcerted, uncertain about how to proceed with this unexpected form of invasion. Emily kept her eyes closed while singing, lost in the music, using it as she always had, as shield, as weapon, as means of survival, and now as a search tool. The song grew in intensity, her voice reaching notes that made the air around vibrate, carrying emotions so pure and raw that some spectators had tears in their eyes. "My God, she sounds like an angel singing," commented a lady to her companion, bringing her hand to her chest emotionally. "I've never heard anything like this, not even inside that theater with all those famous singers." Among the spectators who had stopped to listen was Michael Carter, a man in his 40s dressed with discreet elegance that denoted success without ostentation. A respected music producer in the artistic community, Michael had heard hundreds of voices throughout his career, discovered and polished various talents, but something in that girl's voice hit him differently, more deeply. It wasn't just the impressive technique for someone so young, nor the perfect pitch or breath control that many professionals would take years to develop. It was something in the timbre, in the way she shaped each note, as if music were a native language she spoke with absolute fluency. Michael approached slowly, hypnotized, feeling a strange recognition that he couldn't explain rationally. "It's as if I've heard this voice before," he thought to himself, fighting against a sensation of déjà vu so intense it almost made him dizzy. "There's something about her that reminds me. No, it can't be possible." When Emily finished the song, a reverent silence hung in the air for a few seconds before the small crowd erupted in enthusiastic applause. People approached to leave coins and some bills at her feet, praising her extraordinary talent, asking where she had studied singing. Emily, still not accustomed to such positive attention, thanked them timidly, keeping her eyes downcast while collecting the donations, enough for some decent meals in the coming days. The security guards, however, seemed to have overcome their initial enchantment and were advancing with determined expressions, clearly ready to remove the disturber of order now that her improvised performance had ended. "This is not allowed, girl. You can't stay here asking for money," declared the main security guard, grabbing Emily's arm with more force than necessary. "Come on, move along, before we need to call the authorities." Michael observed the scene with growing indignation. The brutality with which they treated someone with such a gift was revolting, but there was something else, a protective impulse that emerged from somewhere deep and inexplicable. Without thinking twice, he stepped forward, placing himself between Emily and the security guard with the natural authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His name was known in that theater, where he had produced numerous shows, and his presence immediately altered the dynamics of the situation. "Release her immediately," he ordered with a firm voice that admitted no contestation. "This young woman is doing nothing wrong. On the contrary, she's demonstrating more talent on the stairs than many who perform inside with expensive tickets." The security guard hesitated, recognizing Michael, but still reluctant to yield. Emily took advantage of the moment of distraction to free her arm and, frightened by the situation, the attention and the conflict, did what the survival instinct of the streets had taught her. She fled. She crossed the crowd like a small cornered animal, slipping between people with agility born of necessity. Michael, noticing her escape, tried to call her, but his voice was lost among the murmurs of the crowd. Something about that girl had awakened not only his professional interest, but an almost painful curiosity that he couldn't explain. Without thinking twice, he quickly said goodbye to the security guard with a warning that he would talk to the theater management about the treatment given to artists, and followed in the direction Emily had taken. "I need to find her," he muttered to himself as he walked hurriedly through the adjacent streets, looking for the slender figure of the girl. That voice isn't just talent. It's like an echo from the past, a puzzle piece I didn't even know I was looking for. Emily ran without looking back, her heart beating erratically in her chest. Years living in precarious situations had taught her to distrust strangers, especially those who showed sudden interest in her. Although the man had intervened on her behalf, something in the way he looked at her, as if trying to decipher a puzzle, left her deeply nervous. She slowed her pace only when she was sure there was enough distance between her and the theater, her lungs burning from the effort. She found herself in a small wooded square, a green space among the grey buildings of the city, where elderly people played checkers on concrete tables and children played under the supervision of attentive nannies. She sat on a distant bench, trying to regulate her breathing while counting the money obtained from her improvised performance. "Perhaps he could really help me," she reflected, regret beginning to emerge now that the initial panic was diminishing. But how to trust? Mom always said that on the street kindness rarely comes without a hidden price. Michael slowed his pace as he entered the square, his eyes methodically scanning the environment until locating Emily's solitary figure on a distant bench. Instead of approaching directly, he opted for a more casual approach, giving her time to notice him and not feel cornered again. He walked slowly around the perimeter of the square, pretending interest in the trees and birds, but always keeping Emily in his field of vision. When he finally approached, he maintained a respectful distance, sitting at the other end of the bench with deliberately slow and predictable movements. "You have an extraordinary gift," he commented in a calm voice, looking forward instead of staring directly at her. "I haven't heard a voice like yours in a long time. In fact, only once in my life have I encountered a similar talent." Emily remained silent, her muscles tense, ready to flee again if necessary. She studied the stranger from the corner of her eye, evaluating him with the distrust acquired on the streets. He didn't seem threatening. On the contrary, there was a gentleness in his expression that contrasted with the natural authority he had demonstrated in front of the security guards. Still, Emily kept her distance, her fingers unconsciously reaching for the medallion under her blouse, the only tangible link to her past, to the mother she had lost and the father she had never known. "Why did you follow me?" she finally asked, her voice firm despite her inner nervousness. "What do you want from me? I already told you I have no family or money, if that's what you're looking for." Michael smiled sadly, understanding the girl's distrust. Slowly, as if handling fragile and precious material, he took a business card from his pocket and placed it in the empty space on the bench between them. The card was simple but elegant, with the name Michael Carter printed in discreet letters, followed by music producer and contact information for the record label he directed. Emily looked at the card without touching it, as if it might contain some kind of trap. "My name is Michael Carter," he introduced himself with sincerity in his voice. "I've been working with music for over 20 years. Discovering talent is my specialty, and I can say without exaggeration that you have one of the greatest gifts I've ever encountered." The name awakened something in Emily's memory, a hazy recollection of her mother mentioning this name on one of the rare occasions she had spoken about professional music. Emily relaxed slightly, still cautious, but less alarmed. She picked up the card, examining it carefully before putting it in the pocket of her worn pants. Michael began to talk about his work, about how music had been his salvation in difficult moments of his youth, about social projects that his record label maintained for young talents without resources. He spoke with genuine passion, gesturing animatedly as he described the studio and available instruments, the talented musicians he worked with. Emily listened attentively, her distrust gradually diminishing in the face of this man's evident sincerity. "Music isn't just a job for me," Michael explained, his eyes shining with conviction. "It's a form of communication that transcends barriers, that connects souls across time and space. When you sang on those steps, I felt that connection, as if your voice was awakening dormant memories." As Michael spoke, Emily began to move on the bench, coming a few centimeters closer, her body language demonstrating growing comfort with his presence. The afternoon sun filtered through the tree leaves, creating dancing patterns of light and shadow over them. Michael continued sharing stories about his career, mentioning artists he had discovered singing in unlikely situations, talents who today were nationally known. At one point, he stood up to illustrate a particularly funny story about a nervous singer who had fainted during his first audition, imitating the fall in a comical way that drew the first genuine smile from Emily that day. "My full name is Michael Augusto Carter," he commented casually as he returned to the bench, extending his hand formally as if they were just meeting at that moment. "And you, young talent, what's your name? I need to know the name of the next big star I'm going to produce." The full name hit Emily like lightning. Michael Augusto Carter. The initials R.A.M. were engraved inside the medallion, something she had noticed but hadn't understood the meaning of. An extraordinary coincidence or something more? Emily's heart raced as her mind tried to process this new information, connecting dots that previously seemed disconnected. She stood up abruptly, confused and agitated by the possibility beginning to form in her thoughts. In her sudden movement, Emily didn't notice the exposed root of a nearby tree. Her foot caught on the obstacle, causing her to trip and fall forward with a small cry of surprise. "Are you okay?" asked Michael, quickly offering help to lift her up. In the fall, the medallion that Emily kept secure under her blouse detached from the improvised cord she was using, falling to the ground with a metallic tinkle and opening upon impact. Michael, already crouched down to help Emily, saw the silver object and automatically picked it up. His fingers closed around the familiar medallion even before his brain fully registered what he was seeing. When he finally looked at the object in his hand, all color drained from his face. There, protected inside that medallion he himself had given as a gift more than 13 years ago, was the photograph he believed lost forever, him and Laura embracing after his first important performance as a guitarist, before his career took him away and separated them. His fingers trembled as he traced the outline of the damaged photograph, the corner where his own face was partially visible, the guitar he carried with such pride that night. "Where did you get this?" he asked with a trembling voice, almost unrecognizable to his own ears, as his eyes alternated between the medallion and Emily's face with growing astonishment. Emily, now standing, observed the transformation in Michael's countenance with a mixture of fear and hope. Her entire body seemed to vibrate with the tension of the moment, with the perception that she was on the verge of a discovery that would change her life forever. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meanings and possibilities that made the world around suddenly seem distant and irrelevant. "It was my mother's," Emily answered, her voice barely more than a whisper. "She gave it to me before she left." Michael swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on Emily's as if searching in them for confirmation of a suspicion almost painful in its intensity. His hands were still trembling as he held the medallion as if it were the most precious object in the universe. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with contained emotion, with questions he feared to ask and answers he simultaneously longed for and dreaded to hear. "What was her name?" he finally asked, although in his heart he already knew the answer, already recognized in Emily's delicate features the reflection of the woman he had never completely managed to forget and never stopped loving. Time seemed to suspend itself as Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of that moment, the transcendental importance of the simple answer she was about to give. Years of unanswered questions, of empty spaces in her personal history, seemed to converge on this precise instant, on this connection forming before her eyes. "Laura," she answered simply, carefully observing Michael's reaction. "Laura Harris." The color completely disappeared from Michael's face. His eyes, wide with shock and recognition, moved frantically between the photograph in the medallion and Emily's face, as if he were seeing a ghost materialize before him. The resemblance he had only intuited before now screamed at him, the same expressive eyes, the same delicate shape of the face, the same lips that curved in an identical manner. Details that only someone who had deeply known Laura would be able to recognize were there, imprinted on the daughter he never knew existed. Michael brought a trembling hand to Emily's face, stopping millimeters from touching her, as if fearing she might disappear at contact. Not knowing how to tell the truth to the girl, the businessman asked her to accompany him, to show her something at his home. The girl seemed suspicious at first, but he assured her she would be safe, and gave her various information about her mother and details that showed he was a trustworthy man until the girl agreed to go with him. Michael's apartment was on the 10th floor of an elegant building in the most tree-lined neighborhood of the city. Emily hesitated upon entering the mirrored elevator, her multiplied reflection revealing the stark contrast between her worn appearance and the sophisticated environment. Michael noticed her discomfort and maintained a respectful distance, giving her space to process everything that was happening. When the elevator doors opened, revealing a corridor with polished floor and soft lighting, Emily felt a momentary vertigo faced with the surreal reality in which she found herself. She followed Michael in silence to his apartment door, observing how his hands trembled slightly as he turned the key in the lock. It was evident that it wasn't just her who was shaken by the revelations of that afternoon. The man who could be her father seemed equally lost in a whirlwind of emotions he could barely control. "You must be hungry," Michael commented as he turned on the lights, revealing a spacious and cozy environment, with walls covered in framed records and carefully arranged musical instruments. "I can prepare something while we talk or order food if you prefer. I'm not the best cook in the world, but I promise to try to make a decent dish." Emily nodded timidly, still suspicious despite the extraordinary circumstances. She stayed close to the door while Michael disappeared into the kitchen, taking the opportunity to examine the environment that could reveal more about this man who claimed a connection to her past. The walls told the story of a successful musical career, photographs with famous artists, awards discreetly displayed on a shelf, framed sheet music signed by renowned composers. But what really captured her attention was a small photo frame partially hidden among music books, showing a young Laura smiling at the camera with the same guitar that appeared in the locket. Emily's heart raced as she recognized her mother in a younger and visibly happier version, a Laura she had never known, from before the hardships that defined her childhood. "She was so beautiful," Emily murmured, picking up the frame with reverence, feeling a stronger connection with her mother through that image from the past. "I never saw her smile like this, so free as if the whole world was a song she loved to sing." Michael returned to the living room holding 2 cups of hot chocolate, pausing when he saw Emily with the photograph. A shadow of melancholy crossed his face as he placed the drinks on the coffee table and approached cautiously, as if fearing to break the fragile moment forming between them. "I took that picture the day I met her," Michael explained, his voice thick with the emotion of memories returning like a wave. "I was making a documentary about street musicians for Communication College. Laura was singing in the Central Plaza, exactly as you were doing today. It was as if time had stopped when I heard her for the first time." They sat on the large sofa, a respectful distance between them, as Michael began to unfold the story of his romance with Laura. He spoke with painful sincerity about how they met, the intense months they spent together composing songs, dreaming of a shared future in the music world. Emily drank every word like a thirsty traveler in the desert, finally filling the empty spaces of her personal history. Michael occasionally stood up to fetch more photographs, saved tickets from concerts they attended together, even an old cassette tape containing amateur recordings of Laura singing his compositions. With each new artifact presented, the image of her mother gained new dimensions, becoming more complex and human than the sacrificial figure Emily had known. "I never imagined she had this artistic side," Emily confessed, examining a notebook of musical notations where both their handwritings mixed in the margins of sheet music. "She sang to me, of course, but always said it was just to calm me down, never mentioned that she had dreamed of being a singer." Michael's expression darkened as he explained how he had received the opportunity of a lifetime, an international tour as a guitarist accompanying a renowned artist, a unique chance that meant 6 months away from the country, away from Laura. He described the promises they made, the letters he sent in the first weeks, the phone calls that became increasingly rare as his career took off and the distances widened. There was never a formal breakup, just the growing silence that eventually became definitive. When he returned to the country, Laura had disappeared. Nobody knew her whereabouts. Her phone number no longer existed, and the small apartment she rented had new occupants who had never heard of her. "I looked for her for months," Michael admitted, rubbing his tired eyes as if trying to erase the painful memories. "Eventually, I had to accept that she didn't want to be found. I never fully understood why, but I respected her decision, although part of me died that day." Emily felt a knot forming in her throat as she realized the painful truth her mother had hidden. Laura had discovered the pregnancy after Michael left, and for reasons that could now only be speculated upon, decided not to inform him. Perhaps pride, perhaps fear of appearing to use the child to hold on to him, or perhaps simply the belief that he had moved on to a better life that didn't include space for an unexpected family. Whatever the reason, the result had been a life of hardship that could have been very different. Emily felt a wave of sadness for all the lost possibilities, all the years she could have known her father, all the moments her mother had sacrificed in the name of a decision made in youth. "She never spoke badly of you," Emily said softly, offering this small consolation. "The few times she mentioned my father, she always said he was a good man who didn't know about my existence, never that he had abandoned me." The night progressed as they shared stories, filling in the gaps of their separate lives. Emily told about her childhood, the constant financial difficulties, but also the moments of simple joy that Laura always managed to create, even with few resources. She described how her mother had dedicated herself to ensuring she had access to education, sacrificing herself to keep her in school as long as possible, how she had insisted on the importance of music, even in the most difficult times. With a choked voice, she related Laura's final moments, how she had desperately tried to reveal the identity of her father before it was too late. "Her last words were about you," revealed Emily, silent tears running down her face. She said, "Find him, his name is..." And then, her voice failed, unable to complete the painful phrase. Michael was crying now too, making no attempt to hide his emotion. The gravity of what they had lost weighed on both of them like a suffocating blanket. Years of separation, the chance to be a family, the possibility they might have saved Laura if they had been together. But there was also something being born between them, a fragile connection like a sprout breaking through the earth in spring, the promise of a shared future emerging from the ashes of the past. When Emily finally finished telling her story, a heavy silence hung over the room, each lost in their own thoughts and emotions. "I know it's a lot to process," Michael finally said, his voice hoarse from restrained crying. "And I understand if you need time or if you have doubts. But I want you to know that if you are my daughter, and in my heart I already know you are, nothing would make me happier than to recover the time we lost." The following days passed in a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments. Michael insisted that Emily stay in his apartment, preparing the guest room with almost obsessive care. He bought new clothes for her, respecting her simple style but ensuring a quality and comfort she had never had before. Emily alternated between moments of overwhelming gratitude and outbursts of fierce independence, the result of years having to take care of herself. Michael navigated these ups and downs with patience, giving her space when necessary, but always making it clear that he was there, that he wouldn't disappear again. On the third day, after a careful conversation about the subject, they agreed to do a paternity test to officially confirm what their hearts already knew. "Not that I need this to consider you my daughter," Michael assured her as they left the laboratory after collecting the samples. "But it will facilitate the legal processes to formalize your guardianship, and I thought perhaps you would want this certainty too." The wait for the results was a period of silent anguish for both. During the day, they kept themselves busy, Michael working in his home studio, where Emily frequently accompanied him, fascinated by the music production process, or exploring the city together, Michael showing Emily significant places from his shared past with Laura. At night, however, when Emily retired to her room, Michael was haunted by insidious doubts. What if, despite all the evidence, he wasn't really the biological father? The possibility, though remote, tormented him, not because it would diminish his growing affection for the girl, but for fear of causing her yet another disappointment, another loss. Emily, in turn, feared the opposite. That confirmation of paternity might somehow alter the dynamic they were beginning to build, that Michael would feel obligated to care for her out of duty, not choice. Whatever the result, nothing will change what I feel, Michael promised himself, as he watched Emily sleeping on the couch after an exhausting afternoon experimenting with instruments in the studio. She is already my daughter in all the ways that matter. The envelope arrived on a sunny Tuesday, delivered by a messenger who had no idea of the emotional weight of its contents. Michael held the document with trembling hands, waiting for Emily to return from her shower so they could open it together. When she appeared in the living room, wet hair and wearing one of the new clothes that still seemed strange on her body, accustomed to simpler garments, Michael raised the envelope silently. No words were necessary. Emily immediately understood what it was, and her face paled. They sat side by side on the couch, the small white envelope between them seeming simultaneously insignificant and monumental. "Do you want to open it, or would you prefer I do it?" asked Michael, his voice betraying the nervousness he tried to hide. "I can read it first if that's easier for you." Emily made a negative gesture, determination appearing in her gaze. With decisive movements, she took the envelope and opened it carefully, removing the folded sheet from inside. For a moment, she seemed unable to unfold it, as if the act of revealing its contents could somehow alter the reality they were beginning to build together. Michael placed his hand over hers, a silent gesture of support that conveyed more than words could express. Together they unfolded the document, their eyes quickly locating the crucial line among the technical terms and percentages. Probability of paternity, 99%. "You are my father," whispered Emily, her voice broken by contained emotion. "You really are my father." The words hung in the air for a moment before they both reacted simultaneously, the carefully maintained barriers completely crumbling as they embraced for the first time as father and daughter. Emily cried openly, decades of unanswered questions, of unfilled voids, finally finding resolution in her father's arms. Michael sobbed without timidity, his entire body trembling with the force of an emotion he couldn't name. It was gratitude, joy, grief for lost time, and hope for the future, all mixed in an overwhelming wave that threatened to drown him. For several minutes they remained like this, clinging to each other like survivors of a shipwreck who finally find solid ground after drifting adrift. "I promise to make up for every day we lost," murmured Michael against Emily's hair, words broken by sobs. "I know I can't bring your mother back, but I'll do everything in my power to honor her memory, to be the father she wanted me to be." The following days were dedicated to the legal formalities necessary to officialize the new reality. Michael hired the best lawyers to expedite the custody process, using his influence and contacts to navigate the bureaucracy that would normally take months. Emily accompanied him to every meeting, every hearing, her silent but firm presence reminding everyone that this wasn't just about papers and procedures, but about the life of a real girl who had already lost too much time. It was moving to see how Michael, normally reserved in his private life, didn't hesitate to open all aspects of his life. The judge, impressed with the extraordinary circumstances and the obvious connection between father and daughter, finally signed the documents that made official what fate had already determined. Emily was now, legally, Michael Carter's daughter. "A home," Emily murmured to herself that night, settling into the bed that was now officially hers, in a room that Michael had promised they could redecorate together. "I finally have a place where I belong." And so a girl who sang in the streets to survive found not only a home but her true identity. The voice she had inherited from her mother guided her to the father she never knew existed, closing a circle that fate had begun years before. Michael Carter found in his daughter not only the echo of the love he had lost, but the chance to start over, to be the father he never had the opportunity to be. Emily, in turn, discovered that her talent was not just a means of survival, but a precious legacy, the bridge that finally connected her to her origins. The locket that Laura had left with her last incomplete message fulfilled its purpose, finally uniting father and daughter, proving that even in the most unlikely circumstances, love finds its way. Music, which first separated and then reunited them, would continue to be the common language of this reconstructed family, keeping alive the memory of the woman who, though absent, would forever remain between them, in Emily's melody and in Michael's compositions. And so father and daughter moved forward side by side, supporting and caring for each other, like a family filled with love. The scorching sun punished the marble sidewalk of the upscale neighborhood, while Micah carefully organized the few belongings he had managed to gather on an old stretched sheet. At only 10 years old, his small shoulders already carried the weight of responsibilities that even many adults couldn't bear. His trembling fingers arranged the literature books his mother so cherished, bound volumes of poetry and classic novels, some with pages yellowed by time, others still with the characteristic smell of new paper. Beside them, the old golden pocket watch that had belonged to his grandfather, the only memento he kept of the man he barely knew. Mom always said Grandpa used to carry me in his arms singing lullabies, but I was too small to remember. Now it's just another treasure I need to let go to save her, he whispered to himself as a stubborn tear ran down his freckled cheek. The improvised barrier built with cardboard boxes displayed prices written with colored pen on pieces of cardboard. Micah had spent the night awake, calculating how much he would need to complete the exorbitant amount his mother's treatment required. His brown eyes, usually bright and curious, were now opaque, surrounded by deep dark circles that contrasted with his pale skin. He wore his best clothes, a faded blue shirt and jeans slightly short for his size, hoping to look more presentable to the wealthy residents passing by. Some people slowed their pace when passing, looking with a mixture of curiosity and distrust at the lonely boy selling clearly personal objects. An elegant-looking lady stopped briefly, examining one of the hardcover books. "How much for this book, little one? It seems quite worn, don't you think the price is a bit high?" "I can pay half of that," she said, pointing to the tag with an air of superiority that made Micah's stomach turn. The boy swallowed hard, clenching his fist so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The book in question was special, an anthology of poems his mother read to him every night before sleep, even when fever consumed her and each word seemed to cost her twice the energy. Her thin, warm hands turning the pages, the melodic sound of her voice reciting verses that spoke of hope and overcoming challenges. Now those same hands could barely hold a glass of water, and her voice, once so vibrant, was nothing more than a whisper broken by pain. Micah felt tears welling up again, but held them back. He wouldn't bargain, not with this. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't lower the price. My mother has leukemia. The experimental treatment costs more than we earn in a year. And this book would mean more to her than the money you're offering would mean to me," he responded, with a determination that surprised even himself, as the woman quickly walked away, as if the boy's suffering might be contagious. A few meters away, inside a luxury car with tinted windows, Marshall observed the scene with growing interest. The businessman in his 40s was accustomed to evaluating situations with calculating coldness. That's what had taken him to the top, transforming the small family business into an empire. Impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, he checked his wristwatch, an item that probably cost more than all the objects displayed by the boy combined. Originally, Marshall had only stopped on that street to take an important call before heading to a meeting at the business center, but something about the solitary figure of the boy intrigued him. There's something familiar about him. In the way he faces adversity with his head held high, even when tears threaten to fall. He reminds me of someone. But who? He muttered to himself, adjusting the rearview mirror to continue observing the boy while finalizing the call. The morning advanced, and Micah began to feel the effects of heat and hunger. He hadn't had breakfast. The little milk they had at home was saved for his mother, who needed to keep her strength to resist until they could get the money for the treatment. A middle-aged couple approached, examining with genuine interest the few toys the boy displayed. A hand-painted metal car, a set of lead soldiers inherited from previous generations, and a small collection of colored marbles, some with spirals that looked like miniature galaxies. The man picked up the car, spinning the worn wheels with curiosity. "My boy, are all these toys yours? Won't you miss them?" he asked with a gentle voice, while his wife smiled encouragingly. Micah looked at the toys, memories of sunny afternoons playing in the small courtyard of his former apartment, before the illness, before everything fell apart. "They were my favorites, sir, but Mum needs expensive medicine. The doctor said there's a new treatment that could cure her, but the hospital wants a lot of money up front. I'd rather be without toys than without her," he answered, with the painful wisdom of someone who matured far too early. Marshall finally decided to get out of the car, moved by a curiosity he couldn't even explain himself. There was something about the boy that awakened feelings long buried under layers of cynicism and business pragmatism. As he approached the improvised stand, he could better see the displayed items. Well-kept books despite their use, small decorative objects, some clothing pieces, still with tags. But it was the determination in the boy's eyes that really impressed him. That wasn't a look of defeat, it was a look of struggle, of someone willing to make any sacrifice for love. "When was the last time I cared about someone enough to sacrifice something truly valuable?" thought the businessman, feeling a twinge of shame for the lonely, self-centered life he had built. Adjusting his silk tie, Marshall stopped in front of the stretched sheet, aware of the glaring contrast between his Italian shoes and the dusty sidewalk where the boy had set up his modest display. "Hello, young man. I see you have an interesting collection here. Could you tell me more about it?" Micah looked up to face the tall, imposing man who now cast a shadow over his small stand. There was something intimidating about his presence. Perhaps it was the perfectly aligned suit, the designer sunglasses, or simply the aura of authority he radiated. For a moment, the boy feared he might be some kind of inspector or authority who had come to expel him, prohibiting his improvised sale. But there was also a note of genuine interest in the man's deep voice, something that made Micah relax slightly. Straightening himself to appear taller, the boy began to explain each item with the pride of a true merchant. "This watch belonged to my grandfather, sir. He was a watchmaker and said this model had more than 100 gears. And these books are from my mother's personal collection. She's a teacher, or was before she got sick. Each one has stories she's told me since I was little. This one," he said, pointing to a particularly worn volume, "has a special dedication from my father to her, before he left." The conversation was interrupted by the insistent ringing of Marshall's phone. With an apologetic gesture, the businessman answered quickly, stepping away a few paces. It was his secretary, reminding him of the meeting with investors that would start in less than half an hour. With short, precise phrases, Marshall reorganized his schedule, postponing the appointment until later. Something about this casual encounter prevented him from simply turning his back and going on his way. Returning to the boy, Marshall began to examine the objects more closely, running his fingers along the spines of the books, admiring the quality of the antique watch, asking about each piece with genuine interest. It was then that his eyes fell upon a simple picture frame, almost hidden among the other items. The frame was modest, made of light wood with small handcrafted carvings, but that wasn't what captured his attention. It was the photograph protected by the slightly dusty glass, the face of a young, smiling woman with bright eyes and dark hair that framed delicate yet striking features. Is this your mother?" he asked with a suddenly trembling voice, removing his dark glasses to better see the image that seemed to have come directly from his past. Little Micah nodded with a sad smile, picking up the picture frame carefully, like someone holding a fragile treasure. His fingers lovingly cleaned the dust from the glass, revealing even more clearly the woman's face. "Yes, sir. This photo was taken before she got sick, when she still taught at school. She always smiled like this, you know, even when things were difficult. Now she tries to smile, but I know it hurts. I can see it in her eyes. The doctor said without the new treatment, she won't last much longer," explained the boy, his voice failing on the last sentence, as he fought against the tears that insisted on returning. Extending the picture frame so the man could see better, Micah continued, "I didn't want to sell this photo. It's the only one where she looks really happy. But if someone wants to buy it, I'll sell it, because I know Mom would rather be alive with me than have her picture kept on a shelf." Marshall felt as if the world around him had drastically slowed down. The hustle of the busy street, the heat of the midday sun, the weight of his business responsibilities, everything momentarily disappeared as he stared at the photograph. That smile, those eyes, that expression of serene joy. They were unmistakable. Sylvia, the woman he had loved with all the intensity of his youth, the love he believed he had lost forever when she disappeared from his life without explanation, leaving only an emptiness that he had tried to fill with ambition and material success. His hands began to visibly tremble as he held the picture frame, long-repressed memories flooding his mind like an uncontrollable torrent. The shared moments, the promises made, the dreams planned together, and then the searing pain of the inexplicable abandonment that had transformed him into the cold, calculating man he was today. It can't be her. After all these years, it can't be, he muttered, more to himself than to the boy who was watching him with growing concern. A wave of dizziness hit him like a physical blow, making the landscape around him spin violently. "Her name. What is your mother's name, boy?" he asked urgently, his voice now just a hoarse whisper. Micah noticed the drastic change in the man's behavior. The businessman's face, previously composed and impassive, now exhibited an alarming pallor. His hands, which held the picture frame, were shaking so much that the boy feared he might drop the precious photograph. Confused and a little frightened by the stranger's intense reaction, Micah hesitated for a moment before responding. "My mother's name is Sylvia, sir. Sylvia, the literature teacher that all students loved. Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost," he asked, stretching out his small hand as if to support the man who seemed increasingly unstable. The question went unanswered. Marshall took a stumbling step backward, his eyes fixed on the photograph as if hypnotized. The world around him seemed distant and unreal, while flashes of memory passed before his eyes. Sylvia laughing as she ran along the beach, Sylvia concentrated over poetry books, Sylvia in his arms promising eternal love. The realization hit him like lightning. The boy in front of him, with those determined eyes that had so intrigued him, would it be possible? Questions accumulated in his mind in a confused whirlwind, but before he could formulate any of them aloud, his legs gave way beneath his weight. The picture frame slipped from his trembling hands as Marshall collapsed unconscious on the sidewalk, under the terrified gaze of Micah and the few passers-by who witnessed the unusual scene of a millionaire fainting at the feet of a street vendor boy. The smell of antiseptic invaded Micah's nostrils as he huddled in the waiting room chair, his feet barely touching the floor. The fluorescent hospital lights cast a pale glow over his tired face, accentuating the deep circles that framed his anxious eyes. In his small hands, the picture frame with the photo of his mother was protected like a talisman, his fingers unconsciously caressing the wooden frame every few minutes, as if he could extract from it some kind of strength or explanation. The confusion in his mind was almost as intense as the fear he felt. The rich man had fainted upon seeing his mother, not a reaction any stranger would have. Nurses and doctors hurried past, casting curious glances at the solitary boy, who had arrived in the same ambulance as the important businessman, but no one stopped to explain what was happening. Mom always said that fate has mysterious ways of uniting paths that should meet. Could this man have some connection to our past? Could he help us with her treatment? He murmured to himself, while his eyes remained glued to the door through which Marshall had been taken. He had been there for almost 2 hours, his stomach growling with hunger, his throat dry with anxiety. Micah had witnessed all the commotion on the sidewalk, the passers-by stopping in a circle, someone calling the ambulance, paramedics arriving in a hurry and placing the unconscious man on the stretcher. When asked if there was any family member, Micah didn't know what to answer, just firmly held the picture frame and said he needed to go along. To his surprise, one of the paramedics allowed it, perhaps moved by the determination in the boy's eyes, or perhaps just because there was no time for discussions. And now he was there, not knowing whether he should leave or stay, whether he should seek information or wait patiently, whether he should call his neighbor who had promised to check on his mother at the apartment during his absence. The thoughts swirled in his mind like leaves in the wind. If only I could understand what's happening. If only I knew why he reacted that way when he saw Mum. Maybe this is the help I've been praying to find, or maybe it's just another disappointment in our path, he whispered, pressing the photo against his chest as if he could transmit his concerns directly to his mother's dormant heart. The sound of high heels striking against the vinyl floor echoed through the nearly empty corridor, catching Micah's attention. A tall, elegant woman, in an impeccably fitted suit and hair pulled back in a severe bun, approached with determined steps. Her face was a mask of professional efficiency, sharp eyes scanning the room until they settled on the boy. Without hesitation, she sat in the chair next to him, placing her leather portfolio on her lap with a precise movement. "Hello, you must be the boy from the sidewalk. I'm Mr. Marshall's personal secretary. He has regained consciousness and is being examined by doctors now," she said in a controlled voice, neither cold nor warm, just perfectly modulated to convey information without emotion. Her eyes, however, drifted to the picture frame in Micah's hands, a brief flash of curiosity breaking her professional composure. "That woman in the photo seems to have caused quite an impact on my boss. I've never seen him lose control like that in all these years working for him," she commented, her voice now containing an almost imperceptible note of intrigue. Micah straightened in his chair, a thread of hope running through his tired body. The secretary's arrival meant he would finally have some answers. He observed her carefully, noticing how her gestures were calculated and precise, as if each movement had been rehearsed to convey authority. The mention of Marshall's condition brought him momentary relief. At least the man was alive and conscious. But there was something in the woman's tone when mentioning his mother that made him uncomfortable, a veiled suggestion that there was more to this story than it appeared. Clutching the picture frame more tightly, he gathered courage to ask, "Will Mr. Marshall be okay? Why did he faint when he saw my mother's photo? Do you know each other?" The questions came out in a burst, betraying his repressed anxiety. Before the secretary could respond, she opened her portfolio and removed a thick envelope, placing it on the low table between them. "My boss is a very busy and important man. I don't know what kind of connection exists between him and this woman in the photo, and frankly, it's none of my business. I'm here only to resolve this situation in the most efficient way possible. In this envelope, there's enough money to buy all the items you were selling, including this photograph, for double the price you asked. In exchange, we would like you to be discreet about today's incident and go on your way. Mr. Marshall appreciates your understanding." The proposal hung in the air like a heavy storm cloud. Micah looked at the envelope, imagining how much money it might contain. Perhaps enough to start his mother's treatment, maybe even to cover the first few months. The temptation was palpable, like an invisible hand squeezing his heart. With that money, he could run back to the apartment, surprise his mother with the news that he had found a solution, see hope return to those eyes that lately showed only resignation. But something within him rebelled against the idea. It was more than curiosity. It was a deep intuition, almost primitive, that there was something important connecting his mother to this stranger. His small hands began to tremble, not from fear, but from indignation. Some instinct told him there was more at stake in this offer than just discretion about an embarrassing fainting spell. Raising his chin in a defiant gesture that made him seem much older than his 10 years, he pushed away the envelope with surprising firmness. "I don't want your money, ma'am. I mean, I do want it. I desperately need it to save my mother. But not like this. Not without understanding what's happening. I need to know why he fainted when he saw my mother. If he knows her, if there's some history between them, that could be important. Maybe he can really help us. Not just with money, but with answers we've been looking for so long. Please, I need to talk to him." The secretary stiffened, clearly not accustomed to having her offers refused, especially by a child. Her perfectly outlined eyebrows joined in a frown of displeasure as she collected the rejected envelope with rigid movements. For a moment, she seemed about to insist, perhaps increase the offer or try a firmer approach. But something in the boy's determined look made her hesitate. There was a maturity in those young eyes, a willpower that seemed out of place in someone so small. Sighing slightly, she closed her folder with a decisive snap and stood up, adjusting her blazer with a precise tug. "I will inform Mr. Marshall about your refusal. I cannot promise he will agree to see you. My boss values his privacy above all else and does not usually grant unscheduled audiences, especially in situations like this," she declared, her tone now colder, clearly disappointed with the direction of the conversation. Quickly consulting her wristwatch, she added, "Wait here, I will return with his decision. If it's negative, I hope you will reconsider my generous offer. Medical treatment is expensive, and opportunities like this don't come twice for people in your situation." The secretary's words, loaded with barely disguised condescension, echoed in Micah's ears long after her footsteps had faded down the hallway. The silence that followed seemed to amplify the doubts growing in his mind. She was right. The treatment was expensive, terribly expensive. Each day that passed without getting the money was one day less in his mother's battle against the disease. The feeling of helplessness that accompanied him daily threatened to suffocate him again. He rose from the chair and began to walk in circles around the empty waiting room, trying to organize his thoughts. The photo in his hands now seemed to weigh a ton, loaded with unanswered questions and mysterious possibilities. Why would a rich and powerful man faint at the sight of his mother's photo? What kind of history might exist between them? And why had she never mentioned anything about knowing someone like Marshall? The minutes dragged by with torturous slowness as questions multiplied without answers. "Mom always told me stories about the past, about how she met Dad, about the places she lived, but never, not once, did she mention someone like him. What else hasn't she told me? What other secrets does she keep so deeply that even in our most difficult moments she didn't feel comfortable sharing?" he murmured to himself, his voice choked by the mixture of hope and fear that now dominated his heart. When the secretary finally returned, her face was tense, the lines around her mouth more pronounced, suggesting a difficult conversation with her boss. Wordlessly, she gestured for Micah to follow her, leading him through a maze of corridors to a private wing of the hospital. The difference was immediately visible. Shinier floors, walls decorated with discreet but clearly valuable art, deeper silence, only occasionally interrupted by the muffled sound of sophisticated medical equipment. They stopped in front of a door where a security guard in a dark suit stood watch, looking at Micah with a neutral expression that nonetheless managed to be intimidating. The secretary leaned in slightly, her voice low and urgent. "He has agreed to see you, but only for a few minutes. He is emotionally shaken, and the doctors recommend absolute rest. Don't pressure him with excessive questions, and please don't contradict him. Mr. Marshall has a volatile temper when challenged, especially when he's vulnerable. And whatever the connection between him and your mother, it's clearly a delicate matter." Straightening up again, she adjusted an invisible strand of hair and assumed her professional mask. "I'll be waiting out here. If there's any problem, the security guard will intervene immediately. You have exactly 10 minutes, she concluded, opening the door without waiting for a response and practically pushing Micah into the room. The luxury of the hospital room was as disconcerting as the figure of the man who occupied it. Marshall was sitting on the bed, not lying down, as Micah had expected to find him. He wore a silk robe over his hospital pajamas, an incongruity that somehow seemed perfectly natural on him. His face was pale, but his eyes, those penetrating eyes that had examined Micah's belongings on the sidewalk, burned with a feverish intensity. Tubes and sensors connected him to silent machines that monitored his vital signs, subtly reminding that despite all his apparent strength, he was fragile. An untouched food tray rested on a side table, the aroma of a meal certainly more sophisticated than standard hospital food lingering in the air. Marshall observed Micah entering with an expression difficult to decipher, a mixture of anger, curiosity, and something deeper, almost painful. The silence between them stretched like an elastic about to break, until finally the man spoke, his voice contained but loaded with emotion. "So you refused the money. Interesting strategy. How much more do you want? Name your price." Marshall's fingers drummed impatiently on the Egyptian cotton sheet, his tense posture contradicting the apparent casualness of his words. "Everyone has a price, kid. I've learned that over the years. Some people just take longer to admit it." Micah remained standing near the door, feeling deeply out of place in that environment that exuded privilege and power. The photo frame was still firm in his hands, like a shield against the barely disguised hostility emanating from the man in the bed. He took a deep breath, seeking courage from the depths of his being. Fear was there. It would be foolish to deny it. But there was something stronger driving him, the desperate need to understand, to find answers that could change his mother's fate. He took a step forward, then another, approaching the bed with a silent determination that seemed to surprise Marshall. His gaze was direct, devoid of the subservience that the businessman probably expected. "I'm not here to negotiate, sir. I didn't refuse the money to ask for more. I refused because I need to understand what happened. You fainted when you saw my mother's photo. That's not normal. If you know her, if there's a history between you, I have the right to know." The words came out firmly, despite the almost imperceptible tremor in his voice. Raising the photo frame so Marshall could see again the image that had caused so much commotion, he continued, "This is Sylvia, my mother. She's dying of leukemia, and I'm selling everything we have to try to save her. If you can help us in any way, please, not for money, but for any connection you have with her, I'm begging." Tears threatened to form, but Micah contained them, determined to maintain dignity in front of this intimidating man. "I'm not trying to deceive you or extort you. I just want to understand why fate put us on the same path today." Marshall's expression transformed, the mask of control momentarily slipping to reveal a vulnerability that seemed out of place on his habitually impassive face. His eyes fixed again on the photograph, a myriad of emotions crossing his countenance in rapid succession: pain, anger, nostalgia, and something that could be interpreted as longing. For an instant, he seemed about to reach out to touch the image, but stopped himself, clenching his fist so tightly that his knuckles whitened. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of the hostility but acquired a cutting quality, like thin ice that could crack at any moment. "Where did you get that photo? It's a scam, isn't it? Someone sent you here, instructed you on what to say, how to act." The questions fired like projectiles, each loaded with suspicion. Marshall leaned forward, ignoring the accelerated beep of the heart monitor that registered his growing agitation. "You waited all these years to show up like this out of nowhere, with this dramatic story about diseases and expensive treatments. You thought I would easily fall into this trap because of an old photograph? Tell me the truth, kid. Who really sent you?" His breathing had become faster, shallow as he struggled to maintain the control that was clearly escaping him. "You have no idea what you're meddling with, what wounds you're reopening with this cheap theater." The accusation hit Micah like a physical blow, making him instinctively back away. The idea that someone could think he was involved in some kind of scheme, that his pain and desperation were just an act to extort money, was as absurd as it was painful. He felt heat rise to his face, not from shame but from indignation, an emotion he rarely experienced. For a moment he almost turned his back to leave, to flee from the unjust accusations and hostility of that stranger. But the image of his mother, weakened and suffering in their small apartment, anchored him in place. Swallowing his wounded pride, he forced himself to face Marshall's accusing gaze. "It's not a scam, sir. This photo has been on our living room shelf for as long as I can remember. It's the only photo of her smiling that we have. My mother is a literature teacher, or was before the disease took her strength. She taught at various schools, always loved books and poetry. She was always telling me stories, even when she was too tired to get out of bed." Micah's voice trembled slightly, but his eyes remained steady on Marshall's, conveying a sincerity that no child actor could simulate. "I don't know who you are or what my mother meant to you in the past. She never spoke about knowing someone like you, but I know I'm not lying, and with all due respect, I think you know that too deep down. You feel something strong when you see this photo, something real. Please, if you know my mother, if you ever meant something to her, help us understand. I'm not asking for your money now. I'm asking for the truth." A heavy silence settled in the room, disturbed only by the persistent beep of heart monitors and Marshall's irregular breathing. Something in Micah's words had penetrated the businessman's armor of distrust. His eyes, now more scrutinizing than hostile, studied every detail of the boy's face, as if searching for traces of something or someone familiar. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Marshall leaned back on the pillows, the tension in his shoulders marginally decreasing. "Literature," he murmured, more to himself than to Micah. She always loved the classics, could recite Shakespeare from memory, even the most obscure sonnets. The comment escaped like an unintentional confidence, a memory that surfaced spontaneously. Realizing what he had said, Marshall closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to reorganize his thoughts, regain the control that was visibly slipping. When he opened them again, there was a new quality in his gaze, still cautious, still defensive, but with a glimmer of something that could be interpreted as resignation. "Sylvia, your mother, if she really is who I think she is, was the great love of my youth," he finally admitted, the words coming out with effort as if each one caused physical pain. "We met at university. I wasn't rich yet, was just starting out, building my way with difficulty. She was brilliant, passionate about literature, came from a simple but dignified family. We were together for 3 years, the best of my life. We planned to get married, build a life together, and then, from one day to the next, she disappeared. No explanations, no letter, no phone call. She abandoned me without explanation." The revelation hung in the air like an unexpected confession, laden with decades of unresolved hurt. Marshall seemed almost surprised at himself for having shared so much, especially with a child he had considered part of an elaborate scam just minutes ago. His face contorted with the force of contradictory emotions that assailed him. Anger at the old betrayal, confusion at the sudden appearance of this connection to the past, and something more complex that seemed to slowly emerge to the surface. With an abrupt movement, he extended his hand, not for the photo frame but for Micah himself, as if wanting to touch him to confirm his real existence. How old are you?" he asked, his voice suddenly hoarse, trembling with a growing suspicion that seemed to terrify and attract him simultaneously. Before Micah could answer, the door to the room burst open, interrupting the moment. A doctor followed by 2 nurses rushed in, alarmed by the altered vital signs appearing on the monitor at the nursing station. "Mr. Marshall, your heart rate is much too elevated. We need you to calm down immediately, or we'll have to administer a sedative," the doctor declared with professional authority, casting a disapproving look at Micah. "This visit is over. Whoever this young man is, he needs to leave now. The patient's health is our priority." The moment of revelation had been brutally interrupted, leaving both man and boy suspended in a limbo of unformulated questions and incomplete answers. Micah felt firm hands on his shoulders, inexorably leading him toward the door. Panic rose in his throat like bile, the feeling that he was losing something crucial, something that could change everything. Marshall also seemed alarmed by the interruption, trying to push the doctor away with impatient gestures, his eyes still fixed on Micah with an almost feverish intensity. "Wait, we haven't finished our conversation," the businessman protested, his voice stronger now, recovering part of his usual authority. "This boy, I need to know more." The words were lost in the growing tumult, as nurses checked equipment and the doctor spoke in urgent tones about blood pressure and arrhythmias. Micah, already at the threshold of the door, being practically pushed outside by an impassive security guard, gathered all his courage for one last act of defiance. Taking a deep breath, he projected his voice above the medical commotion, the words coming out clear and resonant in the suddenly silent room. "My father died before I was born. At least that's what Mom always said. I'm 10 years and 4 months old, born on November 15th. If you want to find me again, I'll be selling our things on the same sidewalk tomorrow. Mom needs that treatment soon. We don't have much time." And then the door closed, separating them, leaving Marshall with an expression of absolute shock frozen on his pale face, while doctors rushed to stabilize his now dangerously erratic vital signs. Micah climbed the worn steps of the old building with heavy steps. The broken elevator forced him to face the 5 floors on foot. His body was exhausted, but his mind was buzzing with the revelations from the hospital. Marshall's words echoed, "She abandoned me without explanation." The key turned in the rusty lock and he entered the small apartment. The smell of herbal tea and old books enveloped him before his eyes found Sylvia's frail figure, reclining on the sofa, covered by a colorful shawl that did not disguise her alarming thinness. An open book rested in her lap. So many secrets between these walls. Will we ever truly know those we love the most? Thought Micah, closing the door. Sylvia awoke with the soft noise. Her eyes, still bright despite the illness, lit up as she recognized her son. With effort, she straightened up, adjusting the scarf that covered her bald head. Micah noticed how her fingers trembled, how her skin had a grayish tone. Forcing a smile, he sat on the edge of the sofa, taking his mother's cold hands. "How are you feeling today, Mum? The neighbor said you managed to sleep a little," he asked gently, trying to mask the emotional storm consuming him. Sylvia smiled weakly. "I'm fine, my little warrior, just tired. Tell me about your day. Did you sell anything? Your face looks different, as if carrying a new weight. What happened out there?" Micah looked away, the question catching him off guard. The phone in his pocket weighed like lead. At the hospital, he had taken a photo of the businessman. Fidgeting with the hem of his shirt, he tried to find courage. "Mom, something strange happened today. I met a man who seemed to know you," he began hesitantly. "He saw your photo in the frame and had a very strong reaction, fainted on the sidewalk. Paramedics took him to the hospital and I went along. We talked, and he said things about the past, about you two, things you never told me." A frightening transformation occurred on Sylvia's face. The color disappeared completely. Her eyes widened in an expression of terror, pupils dilating. Her hands gripped her son's with surprising strength. Her breathing became erratic. The book slipped from her lap and fell to the floor. Micah, startled by the reaction, almost regretted mentioning the encounter. Sylvia finally spoke, her voice a strangled whisper. "What man, Micah? What was his name?" The questions came out fragmented by growing panic. "Please tell me it wasn't. It couldn't be. After all these years, not now. Not when I'm like this." Micah's hesitation evaporated in the face of her evident panic. With careful movements, he adjusted his position to support her, while his other hand reached for the phone. Sylvia's reaction confirmed what Marshall had said. There was a history between them. Taking a deep breath, Micah unlocked the phone and showed her the hospital photo. "This man, Mom, Marshall. He said you met at university, that you were together for 3 years, that you planned to get married," he explained softly. "He said you disappeared without explanation, and when they kicked me out of the room, I told him I'm 10 years old and that my father died before I was born." The expression on his face. He did the math. "Please, I need to know the truth. Who is my father, really?" Sylvia stared at the photo as if facing a ghost. A violent tremor ran through her weakened body. She raised a hand to touch the screen, her fingers hovering above the image without making contact. A strangled sound escaped her throat. The panic attack was in full development. Sylvia's breathing became increasingly labored. With a trembling movement, she pushed the phone away. Tears streamed down her face. "I didn't want you to find out this way," she finally whispered. "I wanted to protect you, protect both of you. Marshall. My God, how he must hate me now, how you must hate me for hiding this for so long." Micah hugged his mother. He felt her bones against his body, so fragile they seemed they could break. A fury against the unjust fate grew inside him, mixing with the confusion and hope that Marshall's existence represented. Moving back to see her face, he held it between his hands. "Mom, listen, I could never hate you. You're all I have. But I need to understand what happened. Marshall might be the answer to the treatment you need. He has resources, and if there's any chance he's my father, we need that truth now." His voice was urgent but loving. "Please tell me what happened. Why did you run away? Why did you never tell him about me?" Tears flowed down Sylvia's face. With effort, she controlled her breathing. When she found her voice, there was an ethereal quality to it. "We were so young, so full of dreams. We met at the university library. I dropped a pile of books. He helped pick them up. It was like in the movies, one of those moments that change your life." A ghostly smile crossed her lips. 3 years together, the best of my life. Marshall had nothing then, came from a humble family, worked several jobs to support himself through university. He proposed to me with a simple ring, but to me it was worth more than any diamond. Sylvia seemed simultaneously more fragile and more present. I told my father about the engagement. He had never approved of Marshall. That night, he showed me photos. Photos of Marshall with another woman in intimate situations. He said Marshall had been cheating on me for months. I was devastated. And then I discovered I was pregnant. The world collapsed upon me. Micah absorbed every word, pieces of the puzzle of his existence finally fitting together. The pain in his mother's voice was almost physical. The revelation of the alleged betrayal brought a flash of anger directed at Marshall, quickly tempered by doubt. What if it wasn't true? What did you do after that, Mom? Why didn't you confront Marshall? He asked softly. A terrible thought occurred to him. You didn't think about not having me, did you? When you found out you were pregnant? Sylvia recoiled as if struck by the question, horror etched on her face. Never, she affirmed vehemently, a flash of her old strength shining through the mask of illness. I never thought of that, my son. You were the only light in that darkness. Her body relaxed slightly. She continued then, her voice firmer. I ran away. I took what little money I had, dropped out of university, cut contact with everyone. I moved to another city, got a job as a substitute teacher. When you were born, I knew I had made the right choice in keeping you, but the wrong choice in running away. A sob escaped her lips. I tried to convince myself it was better this way. Years later, when I saw his name in the news, I considered getting in touch, but time had passed, and then... Her trembling hand touched the scarf on her head. Then came the illness, and I thought the universe was punishing me for robbing you of the chance to know your father. The silence was interrupted by the ringing of the phone. Micah answered. The voice belonged to the nurse from the clinic, where they had tried to enroll Sylvia for the experimental treatment. A spot had unexpectedly opened up. But there was a condition. The treatment needed to begin in 2 days, and full payment had to be made in advance. After answering a few questions, Micah hung up. He turned to his mother, who watched him with anxious eyes. It was the clinic, he explained with a trembling voice. There's a spot for the experimental treatment, but it needs to start in 2 days and they require payment up front. A flash of determination crossed his gaze. Mom, I need to find Marshall again. Now it's not just about the past, it's about keeping you alive. He has the resources, and if there's any possibility that he's my father, I need to try. Sylvia seemed to have aged 10 years. The mention of the treatment brought an ambiguous shine to her eyes, a mixture of hope and resignation. For a moment she seemed about to protest, but the determination on her son's face silenced her. You have the right to know him, Micah. And he has the right to know you. If I could go back... Her voice faltered momentarily. If I could go back, I would have at least given him the chance to explain himself. My father, he was always manipulative. Those photos. I never questioned their authenticity. A new wave of tears welled in her eyes. Go, find him, but prepare yourself. He may be furious, he may not believe you. I can't promise this will end well, but you're right. We need to try. For you, for me, and perhaps even for him too. The farewell was brief and emotionally charged. Micah left the apartment transformed, with a clear and urgent mission. The address of Marshall's mansion wasn't difficult to discover. The bus journey across the city was a lesson in contrasts, leaving the peripheral zone where he lived to reach the enclave of wealth where mansions competed in ostentation. The property gate was an impressive work of wrought iron, complemented by security cameras. Micah hesitated momentarily, overwhelmed not just by the physical grandeur of the place, but by the symbolism of that barrier. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the intercom button. For you, Mom. For the 3 of us and what we could have been, he murmured to himself. No response came from the intercom. Micah pressed again. When he was about to give up, he caught the sound of an argument coming from inside the property. The voice was unmistakably Marshall's. Approaching the bars of the gate, Micah could distinguish parts of the telephone conversation. I don't care how much it costs. Find everything about this boy and this woman. I want proof of kinship by tomorrow. Genetic test, medical records, birth certificate, everything. The order roared through the air. I'm not interested in your excuses. If you need to bribe someone to speed up this process, do it. But I want answers immediately. The sound of something breaking followed the exclamation. Micah's blood froze. Marshall was investigating him as if they were scammers. The anger he felt was instant. After everything he had shared, there was still distrust. The image of his mother contrasted violently with Marshall's privileged fury. For a moment, Micah considered leaving, but the urgency of the situation didn't allow this luxury. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the intercom continuously. The phone discussion abruptly ceased. An irritated voice erupted through the system. "Who is it? This is private property." Micah recognized Marshall's voice. Swallowing his fear, he responded firmly, "It's me, Micah. From the sidewalk, from the hospital. We need to talk now. It's urgent. My mother. Her condition has worsened. There's a spot for treatment, but we only have 2 days." The silence that followed was tense. Finally, Marshall's voice returned. "Wait there. I'm sending a security guard." A stocky man appeared on the other side of the gate. His face was a mask of indifference as he examined Micah. Without saying a word, he typed a code on the electronic panel, allowing the gate to open partially. "Follow me," he ordered dryly. The path to the mansion was long, a road flanked by perfect gardens. The house was a monument to wealth, an imposing structure of glass, concrete, and steel. Micah followed the security guard in silence, focusing on his objective. As they approached the entrance, raised voices became audible again. The security guard hesitated, uncertain whether he should interrupt his boss. Micah stepped forward, positioning himself where he could be seen through the glass doors. The security guard blocks Micah at the mansion's gate as he shouts with all the strength of his lungs, "Please, Marshall, my mother is dying!" "She might not be lying about you, but I'm not lying about her." The characteristic smell of hospital, a mixture of disinfectant, medications, and that indefinable odor of contained illness, filled the corridors of the oncology center where Sylvia was hospitalized. Through the partially closed blinds, the golden light of dusk penetrated in delicate beams, creating a hypnotic pattern on the impeccably polished vinyl floor. Marshall remained motionless beside the bed, his gaze fixed on Sylvia's sleeping figure. His fingers occasionally adjusted the sheet or gently touched her hand, as if fearing that any firmer contact might break her. Even debilitated by disease, with pale skin and bones prominent under the thin fabric of the hospital gown, she was still unmistakably the same woman he had carried in his heart for an entire decade. The machines monitoring her vital signs emitted rhythmic beeps, a mechanical music that now meant life, hope, a second chance that Marshall never imagined he would have. "How could I live all these years without you? How did I build fortunes and empires while the true wealth was lost to me?" he whispered, more to himself than to her, his voice laden with the weight of wasted years and newly unearthed memories. The experimental treatment had begun that morning, a cutting-edge therapy that he had secretly financed as soon as he confirmed the veracity of Sylvia's condition, bypassing waiting lists and bureaucratic procedures with the power that his money and influence provided. The door of the private room opened with a soft click, and Micah entered silently. The boy seemed to have aged years in the few days since he had burst through the mansion's gate. Deep, dark circles marked his young face, testimony to sleepless nights divided between the apartment and the hospital, organizing belongings, talking with doctors, absorbing the avalanche of changes that had fallen upon his life. Marshall observed his son, with a mixture of admiration and guilt. Admiration for the strength and maturity he demonstrated despite his young age, guilt for all the missed birthdays, all the firsts he would never witness. "She's been sleeping all afternoon," he informed in a low voice, indicating the empty chair on the other side of the bed. "The doctors say it's normal, that the body needs all its energy to respond to the treatment." There was a new quality in his voice when directed at Micah, no longer the defensive hostility of their first encounter, nor the calculating suspicion of the businessman accustomed to being the target of scams, but something softer, almost reverent. "You must be exhausted too. You should rest a bit. There's a comfortable room at the end of the hall that I reserved for us. I can call you if there's any change." The suggestion came almost as a request, a man accustomed to giving orders now trying, cautiously, to establish some kind of connection, some right to show concern. Micah shook his head negatively, approaching the bed from the opposite side, his eyes never leaving his mother's sleeping face. There was a determination in him that Marshall recognized, something he saw in the mirror every day, a strength of will that he now understood was hereditary. The boy didn't completely trust him yet. And how could he? In a few days, his world had been turned upside down, the story of his origin drastically rewritten. Trust would require time, and time was something that now, finally, they could have. "I prefer to stay here," Micah replied, carefully adjusting the colorful scarf that covered Sylvia's bald head. "She was always by my side when I needed her. It's my turn now." The simple phrase contained volumes of love and loyalty that made Marshall swallow hard, a sudden emotion congesting his throat. What kind of person had his son become without his presence? What values and principles had Sylvia instilled in him, despite the difficulties, despite the illness? A shared silence fell over them, not entirely comfortable but no longer hostile. Two strangers connected by blood and by love for the same woman, learning to navigate this new emotional territory. "I spoke with your teachers," Marshall finally broke the silence. "They understood the situation and will send the school material so you don't fall behind. When you're ready, you can return to classes at the same school if you prefer, or wherever you choose." The look of surprise that Micah gave Marshall revealed that the boy didn't expect such consideration. Perhaps he expected to be uprooted from his familiar world and transplanted directly into the privileged universe of his newly discovered biological father. The idea that he could maintain some continuity, some connection with his previous life, clearly caught him off guard. Before he could respond, Marshall reached for an elegant folder on the side table and removed a sealed envelope. For a moment he held it as if the paper contained something precious and fragile, which in a way it was. The test confirmed it. "You are my son," he said simply, extending the envelope across the bed. "But I already knew even before the results arrived. Your eyes. They're exactly like my father's, and your chin, the way you lift it when you're determined to achieve something. That you inherited from me." A hesitant smile, the first that Micah had seen on the businessman's usually serious face, briefly softened his features. "There's more I need to tell you, about the past, about what really happened." Marshall moved to sit on the edge of the bed, his proximity to Sylvia a silent testimony that, even unconscious, she continued to be the gravitational center that kept them in orbit. "I never betrayed your mother, not once. I was young and ambitious, yes, focused on building a future for us, perhaps working more than I should have, but my heart always belonged only to her." Micah's eyebrows furrowed, the confusion evident on his young face as he absorbed the statement. "But what about the photos? Mom said my grandfather showed photos of you with another woman," he questioned, his tone a mixture of skepticism and hope. Marshall nodded gravely, his face hardening with the memory. "Your grandfather never accepted our relationship. I came from a humble family, worked as a waiter to pay for college. In his view, I wasn't good enough for the daughter he wanted to see married to someone of established social position. I tried to prove my worth, saved every penny I earned, studied to exhaustion to get the best grades." A shadow of bitterness crossed his gaze as he continued. "Months after Sylvia disappeared, I discovered by chance that he had hired a woman to seduce me, to create a compromising situation. The photos were real but completely manipulated, an elaborate trap that I didn't even notice until it was too late. I never imagined he could go so far to separate us." Marshall's voice trembled slightly now, the emotional control typical of the ruthless businessman completely absent. "If I could go back in time, I would have fought harder, searched more diligently. Maybe if I had found her sooner." A subtle movement from the figure in the bed interrupted the painful confession. Sylvia's eyes opened slowly, consciousness returning gradually. For a moment she seemed disoriented, her gaze wandering around the room until finding first Micah, a weak smile illuminating her exhausted face, and then Marshall. The sight of him sitting so close provoked a complex expression, surprise, old pain, and something else, something that made her eyes instantly well up with tears. "It wasn't a dream then," she murmured, her voice hoarse and weak. "You really met each other." Marshall took her hand between his with reverent gentleness. "Yes, we met, and now we're all together, as we should have been all these years." Micah moved to the other side, completing the family circle that had been broken for so long. Tears were flowing freely down Sylvia's face now, decades of hurt, regret, and now, finally, hope finding release. "Forgive me, both of you," she whispered, squeezing each one's hand. "For my cowardice, for not questioning, for running away instead of confronting. I stole so much from both of you." Marshall shook his head, gently interrupting her. "There wasn't just you and me in that equation. Your father manipulated all of us. What matters is that now we have a chance to recover something of what we lost, to build something new from here." The door opened again, this time revealing a doctor with a grave expression, accompanied by a nurse carrying a digital clipboard. Micah recognized the oncologist responsible for the experimental treatment, the doctor who had explained in detail the risks and possibilities of the innovative therapy. Something in the professional's tense posture made the boy's heart race. The doctor approached the bed, his eyes quickly assessing the monitors before addressing everyone. "I have news about the initial results," he said, his tone carefully neutral, professional. "The treatment is not responding as we hoped. The cancer cells are showing resistance to the standard protocol we're using." A heavy silence followed the announcement, fear palpable in the air. Sylvia briefly closed her eyes, as if absorbing one more blow in a long series of lost battles. Marshall, however, straightened up, his posture instantly changing to that of an executive accustomed to facing crises. "What are the alternatives?" "There must be other protocols, other approaches," he demanded, the emotional vulnerability of moments before now, hidden under a cloak of pragmatic determination. The doctor hesitated only a moment before continuing. "There is a more aggressive option, but it requires a compatible donor. We need a bone marrow transfusion immediately to enhance the effect of the medications and give Sylvia's body a chance at recovery." Marshall and Micah exchanged identical looks of determination. "Test us," they said almost in unison, a synchronicity that, under other circumstances, might have been comical. The doctor shook his head, an expression of regret softening his features. "We've already done preliminary tests when the initial samples were collected. Unfortunately, neither of you is compatible to the necessary degree. We need a direct relative with greater compatibility, or search the National Donor Registry, which could take too much time considering the current state." Sylvia emitted a choked sound, part sob, part resignation. Micah felt despair growing. The image of his mother finally reunited with his father, only to lose her now, was unbearable. Marshall, however, remained still for only a moment before pulling out his phone. His fingers slid across the screen, locating a contact that clearly wasn't frequently used. "There's someone who might be compatible," he declared, his tone revealing that this wasn't an option he considered with pleasure. "My brother Spencer. We haven't spoken in many years after a family dispute over our father's company. But if there's a chance..." Without waiting for a response, he pressed the call button, putting the phone on speaker mode. The silence in the room was absolute, as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. When a male voice finally answered, a voice surprisingly similar to Marshall's, though with a softer tone, the tension was palpable. "Marshall?" The single word carried years of distance and distrust. Marshall breathed deeply, his gaze never leaving Sylvia's worried face. "Spencer, I need your help. It's a medical emergency. I found Sylvia after all these years, and she has advanced leukemia. We need a compatible bone marrow donor immediately." The brevity and urgency of the information, without preambles or attempts to smooth over years of estrangement, revealed the gravity of the situation. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several agonizing seconds. When Spencer finally responded, his voice had subtly changed. "Sylvia? That Sylvia? The one who disappeared?" A meaningful pause before he continued. "How long do I have to get there?" The simple response, devoid of hesitation at the mention of the medical emergency, made Marshall's tense shoulders visibly relax. "As quickly as possible. I'll send a car, a helicopter, whatever is necessary." Spencer replied with a firmness that echoed his brother's determination. "I'll be there in 2 hours. Send the address, and Marshall, stay strong." The compatibility test brought news that seemed almost miraculous in its perfection. Spencer was an ideal donor, with high levels of compatibility rarely found outside of twin siblings. The procedure was performed immediately, without the usual waits and preparations that hospital protocols normally required. Marshall's financial resources eliminated any bureaucratic obstacle, while Spencer's determination to help not just a stranger in need, but someone who had meant so much to his brother, provided the final element necessary for what doctors would later describe as a perfect confluence of favorable circumstances. The aggressive treatment, enhanced by the compatible bone marrow transfusion, began to show results in the first weeks. Recovery wasn't instantaneous or easy. There were days of high fever, debilitating side effects, torturous doubts about whether they had made the right decision. But gradually, cell by cell, Sylvia began to respond, color slowly returning to her cheeks, her strength increasing almost imperceptibly at first, then more visibly. Months passed. Seasons changed outside while inside Marshall's mansion, now renovated to accommodate his new family, a small miracle unfolded daily. The area that was once cold and impersonal, decorated to impress but not to welcome, had been transformed. Books now filled shelves that previously displayed only art objects chosen by professional decorators. A piano that had remained silent for years sounded again, with Micah revealing a musical talent he had inherited from somewhere in the family lineage. The master bedroom, once a lonely and functional space, now contained evidence of a feminine presence. A perfume on the dressing table, a shawl casually thrown over an armchair, 2 toothbrushes side by side in the bathroom. Spencer, initially a hesitant visitor to that house he once considered enemy territory, now appeared regularly for family dinners, the old rivalry dissolved in the shared crisis and subsequent joy of Sylvia's recovery. It was during one of these dinners, when autumn painted the garden trees golden red, that Marshall finally found the courage for the gesture he had been planning for weeks. Sylvia was sitting at the table, her hair, now growing again in short, soft curls, capturing the soft light of the candelabras. She wore a simple but elegant dress, her figure still thin but no longer fragile, gradually recovering the curves that illness had stolen. Micah was animatedly talking about a school project, his excellent grades a source of pride for both parents, when Marshall suddenly stood up. Silence fell over the table as he went to a small cabinet in the corner of the dining room, returning with a small velvet box worn by time. Without words, he knelt before Sylvia, who brought her hands to her mouth in a gesture of surprise. "I bought this ring more than 10 years ago," said Marshall, his voice laden with emotion as he opened the box, revealing a modest but elegantly and classically designed solitaire. "It's not the most expensive or impressive I could buy today, but it represents our beginning, our dreams, our love, before everything was complicated by misunderstandings and separations. We lost a lot of time apart, Sylvia. I don't want to lose even one more second." The proposal hung in the air, carrying the weight of decades of interrupted and now reborn love. Sylvia, tears flowing freely down her face, extended her trembling hand. "Yes," she simply whispered, as Marshall slid the ring onto her finger. Micah, unable to contain his own emotion, launched himself into an embrace that enveloped both, completing the once broken family circle. Sylvia, wrapped in the arms of the 2 most important men in her life, closed her eyes in absolute contentment. "Finally," she said through tears of joy, "we are complete." If Micah and Marshall's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're from. And don't go anywhere. The next story is already appearing on screen, made especially for you. See you soon.